while helping a truck driver on the road. The army officer froze when he saw her ring. The same ring he gave to his lost beloved before leaving for war 28 years ago. The Texas heat shimmered off the asphalt of U.S. Highway 60 like a mirage, distorting the horizon where the desert met the endless blue sky. Colonel James Whitaker gripped the steering wheel of his pickup truck with calloused hands, the familiar weight of his dress uniform making him shift uncomfortably in the driver's seat. At 52, this would be his last drive home from active duty, 30 years of service finally coming to an end. The radio crackled with static between stations, filling the cab with white noise that matched the emptiness he felt inside. Retirement. The word sat heavy on his tongue every time he tried to say it out loud. What did a career soldier do when the war was over? When the mission was complete? His eyes caught movement ahead. A massive 18-wheeler pulled over on the shoulder, hazard lights blinking like an SOS signal. Steam rose from under the hood in thick, angry clouds. James slowed his truck, military instincts kicking in. You didn't leave someone stranded on a highway this desolate. Not when the next town was 40 miles away and the sun was already hanging low in the western sky. He pulled over behind the rig and killed the engine. The desert silence was profound, broken only by the tick of cooling metal and the distant whistle of wind through sagebrush. As he approached the truck, he could hear someone cursing, creative combinations that would make a drill sergeant proud. "Need some help," James called out, his voice carrying that authority that came from decades of command. A figure emerged from behind the raised hood. A woman, probably late 20s, with dark hair pulled back in a ponytail and grease streaking her forearms. She wore worn jeans and a tank top that had seen better days, but there was something in the way she carried herself that spoke of independence and strength. "Unless you've got a miracle in that fancy uniform, I doubt it," she replied, wiping sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand. "Radiators shot to hell, and I'm still 300 miles from Phoenix." James stepped closer, his trained eye assessing the situation. "I might not have miracles, but I've got 30 years of keeping military vehicles running in worse conditions than this. Mind if I take a look?" The woman hesitated, sizing him up with sharp green eyes. There was wariness there, the kind that came from learning not to trust too easily. "You military?" "Colonel James Whitaker, U.S. Army, retired as of about 6 hours ago." He offered a slight smile. "Though I guess old habits die hard." Something in his tone must have convinced her because she stepped aside. "Olivia Bennett, and I appreciate the offer, but I've been working on engines since I was knee-high to a grasshopper. This baby's cooked." "Olivia?" The name felt familiar on his tongue, though he couldn't place why. "Well, Olivia, sometimes a second pair of eyes can spot what the first pair missed. No harm in looking, right?" She shrugged, a gesture that seemed to say she'd take help from the devil himself if it meant getting back on the road. As James leaned over the engine, Olivia moved to stand beside him, pointing out what she'd already diagnosed. "See how the coolant's boiled over? And there, that crack in the radiator housing? I've been nursing this old girl along for the past 50 miles, but she finally gave up the ghost." James nodded, genuinely impressed by her mechanical knowledge. Most people would have been stranded and helpless, but this woman had coaxed 50 extra miles out of a dying engine. "You know your way around machinery. Had to learn. Can't rely on anyone else out here." There was an edge to her voice, a story behind the words that James recognized. He'd heard that tone before, from soldiers who'd learned early that survival meant self-reliance. As they discussed possible solutions, Olivia pulled off her work gloves to get a better grip on a wrench. The late afternoon sun caught something on her hand, a flash of green that made James's breath catch in his throat. There, on her ring finger, was a silver band set with a perfect emerald. The stone was small but flawless, catching the light like captured fire. James felt the world tilt slightly, his vision narrowing to that single point of green brilliance. He knew that ring. He'd bought it 28 years ago in a pawn shop outside Fort Hood, spending his entire month's pay because he'd fallen hopelessly in love with a girl named Catherine Doyle. The emerald had reminded him of her eyes, that same impossible shade of green that seemed to hold depths you could lose yourself in. "Where did you get that ring?" The words escaped before he could stop them, his voice rougher than intended. Olivia's hand immediately closed into a fist, hiding the ring. Her expression shuddered, walls slamming down so fast James could almost hear them. "It was my mother's..." Only decent thing she ever left me before she decided I wasn't worth sticking around for." The casual bitterness in her voice hit James like a physical blow. His mind was racing, calculating dates and possibilities that seemed impossible but were adding up with terrifying clarity. "Your mother's name. What was it? Why does it matter?" Olivia's voice had gone cold, defensive, just curious. "That's a beautiful ring. And the story behind jewelry can be Catherine Doyle." The name exploded from Olivia like a curse. "There's your story, Catherine Doyle, who left me with my Aunt Anne when I was 3 years old and never looked back, said some bullshit about how some loves are impossible, and disappeared like smoke." James felt his knees go weak. Catherine, his Catherine, the woman he'd loved with every fiber of his being, the woman who'd vanished without a trace exactly 1 week after he'd deployed to the border. He'd given her that ring the night before he left, promising he'd come back and marry her properly. But she'd been gone when he returned 6 months later, leaving only a note that he'd read so many times the paper had fallen apart in his hands. The same words Olivia had just repeated. "Some loves are impossible." He forced himself to breathe, to keep his expression neutral, even as his world tilted off its axis. Olivia had been born 27 years ago. He'd left for deployment 28 years ago. The math was simple, brutal, and undeniable. "When's your birthday?" he asked quietly. Olivia's eyes flashed with suspicion. "What kind of question is that?" "Humor me." "March 15th. "Why?" "March 15th, 9 months exactly from the night he'd given Catherine the ring. 9 months from the last time they'd made love, whispering promises in the dark about the future they'd build together." "Jesus Christ," he breathed, the words barely audible. "What?" Olivia's voice sharpened. "You're starting to creep me out here, Colonel." James looked at her, really looked at her for the first time. The shape of her jaw, the set of her shoulders, even the stubborn tilt of her chin when she was challenged. How had he missed it? She had Catherine's eyes, but everything else was him. The way she stood, the confident competence with machinery, even the way she assessed a problem with methodical precision. This was his daughter, his child, the baby Catherine had been carrying when he left, the secret she'd taken with her when she disappeared. Olivia Bennett, no, Olivia Whitaker, was his flesh and blood, standing here 27 years later wearing the ring he'd placed on her mother's finger. "Nothing," he managed, his voice hoarse. "Just, you remind me of someone I used to know." Olivia studied his face with those sharp green eyes, Catherine's eyes, and James wondered if she could see the truth written there, but she just shrugged and turned back to the engine. "Yeah, well, we all remind someone of someone. Doesn't fix my radiator." James nodded, forcing himself back to the present moment. His daughter needed help, and he'd be damned if he'd fail her the way he'd apparently failed Catherine. "There's a town about 15 miles east of here, Millerville. Small place, but they've got a decent garage. I could give you a ride there, help you arrange for a tow." "I don't know." Olivia hesitated, and James could see the internal struggle playing out across her face, independence warring with practicality. "Look, I know you don't know me from Adam, but you're stuck out here as the sun's going down. This stretch of highway gets pretty desolate after dark." After a long moment, Olivia nodded. "Okay, but just to the town. I can handle things from there," as she gathered her things from the truck cab. James stood in the desert silence, his mind reeling. 28 years. 28 years of wondering what happened to Catherine, of searching every database and hiring every private investigator he could afford. And all this time, their daughter had been growing up believing her mother had abandoned her. What had happened? Why had Catherine left? And why had she never told him about the baby? The questions crashed over him like waves, but one thought rose above the chaos. He'd found her, against all odds, on a desolate highway in the middle of nowhere. He'd found his daughter. Now he just had to figure out what the hell to do about it. The drive to Millerville stretched out like an eternity compressed into 15 minutes. James kept stealing glances at Olivia in his peripheral vision, searching for more traces of Catherine, more evidence of the impossible truth that had just shattered his world. She sat rigid in the passenger seat, clearly uncomfortable with accepting help from a stranger, her hand unconsciously turning the emerald ring around her finger. The silence between them was heavy with unspoken questions. James's mind raced through decades of what-ifs and might-have-beens, while Olivia stared out the window at the passing desert landscape, lost in thoughts she didn't share. "So what brings a retired colonel to this godforsaken stretch of highway?" Olivia finally asked, her voice carefully neutral. "Heading home to El Paso, been stationed at Fort Carson in Colorado for the past 3 years." James kept his tone conversational, fighting the urge to probe deeper into her life. "What about you, Phoenix? A regular run?" "Regular enough. I haul freight all over the Southwest. Phoenix, Tucson, Albuquerque, sometimes as far as Las Vegas." She shifted in her seat. "Been doing it for about 5 years now. Good money, and you're your own boss. That's important to you, being your own boss." Olivia's laugh was sharp. "Bitter. Let's just say I learned early not to depend on other people sticking around when things get tough." The words hit James like a punch to the gut. His daughter, Christ, he was still wrapping his head around that, had grown up believing the people who should have loved her most had simply walked away. The injustice of it made his hands tighten on the steering wheel. "People leave for all kinds of reasons," he said carefully. "Sometimes it's not about the people they're leaving behind." "Yeah, well, when you're 3 years old, philosophy doesn't mean much. All you know is that your mom packed her bags and disappeared. And your dad," she trailed off, shaking her head. "Well, let's just say some guys aren't built for the long haul." James felt like he was walking through a minefield, every word potentially explosive. "Your father left too." "My father?" Olivia's voice dripped with contempt. "I don't even know who the hell my father is. My mom never bothered to share that particular detail before she decided to vanish from my life. The casual dismissal of his existence, of him, was like a knife twisting in his chest. But how could he blame her? As far as Olivia knew, her father was just another man who'd abandoned responsibility, another person who'd chosen to disappear rather than step up. "Maybe he didn't know," James said quietly. "Maybe if he had known, things would have been different." Olivia turned to look at him then, her green eyes, Catherine's eyes, sharp and assessing. "That's a pretty generous assumption about someone you've never met. Sometimes people make mistakes they spend their whole lives trying to fix. And sometimes people just don't give a damn." The finality in her voice shut down that line of conversation. But James could see the pain underneath the armor she'd built around herself. They reached Millerville, just as the sun was touching the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and reds. The town was exactly what James had expected. A handful of buildings clustered around a single main street, the kind of place that existed primarily to serve travelers passing through on the highway. Murphy's garage sat on the corner of Main and Highway 60, a weathered building with 2 service bays and a hand-painted sign that had seen better decades. James pulled into the gravel lot and killed the engine. "Looks like they're still open," he observed, noting the lights in the office window. "Good. Maybe I can get this sorted out tonight and be back on the road by morning." Olivia was already reaching for the door handle, ready to handle business and move on. "Mind if I come in with you? Might be easier to explain the situation with 2 people." She hesitated, and James could practically see her internal debate. Accept more help from this stranger, or maintain her independence at the cost of efficiency. "Fine, but I'm handling the negotiations." The garage owner, a grizzled man named Murphy who looked like he'd been working on engines since the Model T, listened to their explanation with the patience of someone who'd heard every road story imaginable. After a few phone calls, he confirmed what James had suspected. Getting a tow truck out to the highway at this hour would cost extra, and getting the parts to fix Olivia's radiator would take at least 2 days. 2 days. Olivia's voice rose. "I've got a delivery schedule to keep." Murphy shrugged apologetically. "Sorry, miss. Best I can do is get you towed in first thing tomorrow morning, but that radiator's gonna need to be rebuilt, and the parts have to come from Phoenix. Wednesday earliest. More likely Thursday." James watched Olivia's jaw clench as she calculated the financial hit. Lost income, hotel costs, meal expenses. It would add up fast for an independent trucker operating on thin margins. "There's a decent motel just down the street," Murphy offered. "The roadside inn, nothing fancy, but it's clean and the owner's honest." After arranging for the morning tow, they walked back toward James's truck in the gathering dusk. Olivia was quiet, and James could practically feel the frustration radiating from her. "This is going to cost me a fortune," she muttered, more to herself than to him. "I could help with—" "No." The word came out sharper than she'd probably intended. "Thanks, but no. I don't take charity." "It wouldn't be charity, it would be—" He paused, searching for words that wouldn't reveal too much. "Call it one veteran helping another? You've got the look of someone who's fought some battles." Olivia stopped walking and turned to face him. "What's your angle here, Colonel? You pick up stranded truckers often." The directness of the question caught James off guard. She was testing him, trying to figure out his motivations. Smart, cautious, survival instincts honed by years of disappointment. "No angle. Just seems like the right thing to do. In my experience, guys who say there's no angle usually have the biggest angle of all." James felt a surge of pride. Despite the circumstances, this young woman, his daughter, had learned to protect herself in a world that had taught her not to trust. She was strong, independent, capable. Catherine had done right by her, even if she'd had to leave to do it. But why had she left? That question burned in James's mind like acid. What had happened 27 years ago that made Catherine believe disappearing was her only option? "Fair enough," he said. "How about this? I was planning to stay in town tonight anyway, early start tomorrow, and I'm getting too old to drive straight through. No charity, no angles, just a coincidence." Olivia studied his face in the fading light. Looking for deception, whatever she saw there seemed to satisfy her, because she nodded slowly. "Okay, coincidence I can live with." As they checked into the roadside inn, James insisting on separate rooms despite Olivia's protests about the expense. He found himself marveling at the strange turns life could take. This morning, he'd been a recently retired colonel with nothing but empty years ahead of him. Tonight, he was sharing a motel parking lot with the daughter he'd never known existed, wearing the ring he'd given to the only woman he'd ever truly loved. "You want to grab some dinner?" he asked as they stood outside their respective room doors. "There's a diner across the street. Their chicken fried steak won't win any awards, but it'll fill you up." Olivia hesitated again, and James could see her weighing practicality against her instinct to maintain distance. "My treat," he added. "Considerate payment for letting me play Good Samaritan. Made me feel useful for the first time in months." "When you put it like that," a small smile touched the corners of her mouth. The first genuine expression he'd seen from her. "I guess I could eat." As they walked across the street toward the diner's neon sign, James felt a mixture of hope and terror building in his chest. Every minute he spent with Olivia revealed more layers to the woman Catherine had raised, and every revelation made the truth he was carrying feel heavier. Somewhere in this small desert town, surrounded by the vast emptiness of the American Southwest, a father and daughter were about to share a meal without knowing their connection, and with every word they exchanged, James moved closer to the moment when he'd have to decide whether to shatter the life Olivia had built on the foundation of believing she'd been abandoned by everyone who should have loved her. The emerald ring caught the diner's neon glow as Olivia reached for the door handle, and James wondered what Catherine would think of the woman their daughter had become. The diner's fluorescent lights cast everything in harsh relief, making the red vinyl booths look like they'd been dipped in artificial cherry syrup. James sat across from Olivia, pushing eggs around his plate, while his mind churned with questions he couldn't ask directly. She ate with the efficient focus of someone who'd learned not to waste food or time, but he caught her watching him between bites with those sharp green eyes. "So what's a retired colonel do with himself?" she asked, cutting into her chicken fried steak. "Golf, fishing, build model airplanes in the garage. Haven't figured that out yet." James took a sip of coffee that tasted like it had been sitting on the burner since morning. 30 years of having every day planned for you, and suddenly you wake up with nothing but empty calendar squares. Sounds like freedom to me. Maybe, or maybe it's just another kind of prison. Olivia paused mid-chew, studying him with newfound interest. "You don't strike me as the philosophical type, Colonel." "James. And you'd be surprised what retirement does to a man's perspective." They fell into comfortable silence. The diner's ambient noise, the sizzle of the grill, the murmur of other conversations, the clink of silverware, filling the space between them. James found himself memorizing details. The way Olivia held her fork, the small scar on her knuckle, the unconscious gesture she made of touching the emerald ring when she was thinking. "That ring," he said carefully. "You said it was your mother's. Did she leave anything else behind?" The question hit its mark. Olivia's expression shuddered immediately, walls slamming back into place. Why do you keep asking about my mother? Just making conversation. Bullshit. She set down her fork with deliberate precision. You've been circling around questions about her since we met. What's your deal? James felt heat creep up his neck. He was pushing too hard, too fast, and Olivia was too smart not to notice. Sorry, old habit. I spent a lot of years interrogating people. Sometimes the instincts kick in when I shouldn't let them. Well, kick them somewhere else. My mother's not a topic I discuss with strangers. The word strangers hit him like a physical blow. Even though it was true, that's what they were. Strangers connected by blood and history neither of them fully understood. After dinner, they walked back across the street in silence. The desert night had settled around Millerville like a blanket, bringing with it the kind of profound quiet that only existed in small towns, far from civilization. Stars blazed overhead with an intensity impossible to see in the cities, and James found himself wondering if Catherine had ever stood under this same sky, looking up at these same constellations. I'm going to turn in, Olivia announced when they reached their rooms. Thanks for dinner and the ride and... She seemed to struggle with expressing gratitude, as if the words were unfamiliar in her mouth. You don't owe me thanks. Just get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. She nodded and disappeared into her room, leaving James standing alone in the parking lot, with the weight of everything unsaid pressing down on his shoulders. He waited until he heard her TV come on through the thin walls, then quietly made his way back to his truck. The phone book in the diner had been ancient and yellow-edged, but it had contained what he needed. Bennett, Ann. 412 Sycamore Street. Only 1A. Bennett in a town this small, and the address was less than 6 blocks away. James drove through Millerville's empty streets, past dark storefronts and houses where families were settling in for the night, until he found Sycamore Street. Number 412 was a small ranch house with a well-maintained yard and a porch light that cast a welcoming glow over the front steps. He sat in his truck for several minutes, engine ticking as it cooled, trying to work up the courage to knock on that door. Ann Bennett was the key to understanding what had happened 28 years ago, but approaching her meant crossing a line he couldn't uncross. Once he started asking questions, there would be no going back to the comfortable lie that his life had been. The porch light flickered, probably on a timer, and James took it as a sign. He climbed out of the truck and walked up the flagstone path, his military bearing giving him confidence he didn't feel. Ann Bennett answered the door on the second knock. A woman in her early 60s with gray-streaked brown hair pulled back in a practical bun and intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. She wore a faded floral robe and held a cup of tea that steamed in the cool night air. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice carrying the polite wariness of someone unaccustomed to unexpected visitors. "Mrs. Bennett, my name is James Whitaker. I was hoping I could speak with you about your niece." "Olivia." The teacup slipped from Anne's fingers, shattering on the concrete porch with a crash that seemed to echo through the quiet neighborhood. Her face went white, and she gripped the doorframe for support. "Oh my God," she whispered. "It's you. You're him." The words hit James like electricity. She knew. Somehow, Ann Bennett knew exactly who he was and why he was standing on her porch at 9 o'clock on a Tuesday night. "May I come in?" Ann looked over his shoulder toward the street, as if checking for observers, then stepped aside. "You'd better." Her living room was a study in comfortable clutter, family photos on every surface, books stacked on coffee tables, a half-finished crossword puzzle spread across an ottoman. James recognized some of the photos immediately. Olivia as a child, gap-toothed and grinning. Olivia as a teenager, already showing signs of the independence that defined her. Olivia graduating from high school, standing alone in her cap and gown. "She doesn't know, does she?" Anne asked, settling heavily into an armchair. "About who you are. We just met a few hours ago. Her truck broke down on the highway." James remained standing, too wired to sit. "Mrs. Bennett, I need to know what happened. I need to know why Catherine left. After 28 years, you show up asking questions." Anne's voice carried decades of carefully controlled anger. "Do you have any idea what your disappearance did to that girl? Do you know what Catherine went through?" "My disappearance?" James felt the world tilt slightly. "I didn't disappear. I went on deployment. I came back and she was gone." "Deployment?" Anne said the word like it tasted bitter. Is that what you called it? Catherine waited for you, 6 months. She waited, sending letters that came back marked "Return to sender," making phone calls to numbers that were disconnected. That's impossible. I never got any letters. I tried to contact her. But what? You tried calling the number she gave you and got a recording saying it was no longer in service. You went to the address she'd written down and found out no one by that name had ever lived there. James stared at her, his mind racing. How did you know that? Because that's what she told you to do. False name, false address, false phone number. She thought if she could just disappear cleanly, it would be easier for everyone. The room seemed to spin around James. False name. Catherine Doyle wasn't her real name. Catherine Marie Doyle was her middle and maiden names. Her real name was Catherine Marie Santos. She was my sister's girl, and she was scared out of her mind. Scared of what? Anne was quiet for a long moment, studying his face as if trying to decide whether he could handle the truth. Finally, she sighed deeply, scared of what she'd gotten involved with, scared of the people who were looking for her, and scared of dragging you down with her. What people? Anne, please, I've spent 28 years wondering what happened. I loved her. I would have done anything. That's exactly why she couldn't tell you. Anne's voice was sharp with old pain. Because you would have done anything. You would have tried to save her. And you would have gotten yourself killed in the process. James felt his legs go weak. He sank onto the couch across from Anne, his mind struggling to process what she was telling him. She was pregnant, he said quietly. Yes, with your baby. The only good thing to come out of that whole nightmare was Olivia. She never told me. She couldn't. By the time she knew for sure, the die was already cast. She'd seen something she shouldn't have seen, and there was no going back. What did she see? Anne's hands twisted in her lap, and James could see the internal struggle playing out across her face. 28 years of keeping secrets warring with the relief of finally having someone to tell them to. Murder, she said finally. Catherine witnessed a murder, and the wrong people found out about it. The word murder hung in the air between them like smoke from a gunshot. James felt his military training kick in, his mind automatically cataloging details and assessing threats, even as his heart hammered against his ribs. Tell me everything, he said, his voice taking on the commanding tone that had served him through 3 decades of military operations. Anne rose from her chair and walked to the window, peering through the curtains at the empty street. You have to understand. This was a different time. The early 90s. The drug trade was exploding through this part of the country, money flowing like water, and where there's that much money, there's violence. Catherine was working at a truck stop outside El Paso, night shift, trying to save money for when you came back. She was planning to surprise you, had this whole fantasy about you coming home to find out you were going to be a father. Anne's voice carried the weight of old heartbreak. She picked up extra shifts, double shifts sometimes, anything to put away money for the baby. James closed his eyes, picturing Catherine pregnant and alone, working herself to exhaustion for a future that would never come. The guilt was crushing. The truck stop was a front, Anne continued. Not officially, but everyone knew certain drivers made certain stops, picked up certain packages along with their regular cargo. Catherine wasn't involved. She was just slinging coffee and burgers to whoever came through, but she had eyes, and she wasn't stupid. What did she see? Anne turned from the window, her face grave. March 22nd, 1997, 3 a.m, slow night. Catherine was cleaning tables when she heard shouting from the back lot. She went to check it out. Stupid, but she was young and curious. James could picture it perfectly. Catherine had always been fearless, sometimes recklessly so. It was one of the things he'd loved about her, and apparently one of the things that had destroyed her. There were 4 men arguing over a shipment. Drugs, money, both. Catherine never knew for sure. But the argument turned violent fast. One of them pulled a gun, shot another man point blank, right there in the gravel parking lot, under the security lights. Did she call the police? That's what any normal person would do. But Catherine wasn't thinking like a normal person. She was thinking like someone who was 3 months pregnant and terrified. She ran back inside, grabbed her purse, and drove straight home. To you? No, to her little apartment on the east side. She called me, hysterical. barely making sense. I drove over there and found her packing everything she owned into 2 suitcases. Anne sat back down, her movements careful and deliberate. She kept saying they'd seen her, that one of them had looked right at her when she was running back to the building. James leaned forward, every instinct screaming that this story was about to get worse. Had they seen her? She thought so. Maybe. Does it matter? By morning, news of the murder was all over the radio. The victim was a small-time dealer, but the investigation was going to be thorough, and Catherine knew that if they found out she'd witnessed it, she'd either end up dead or in witness protection, and neither option was compatible with the life she wanted to build with you. The pieces were starting to fall into place, creating a picture that made James sick to his stomach, so she decided to disappear. She convinced herself it was the only way to keep everyone safe. You, the baby, even me. She used her middle names, moved around constantly, never stayed anywhere long enough to put down roots. But why didn't she contact me after I got back? Explain what happened. Anne's laugh was bitter. And tell you what, exactly? That she was on the run from drug dealers. That your unborn child was living in motels and cheap apartments because she'd witnessed a murder. You were military, James. You would have gone after them. She was right, and they both knew it. James would have hunted down every man connected to that murder, would have moved heaven and earth to eliminate the threat to his family, and probably would have gotten himself and Catherine killed in the process. She loved you too much to destroy your life, Anne continued. And she was too proud to drag you into her mess. Her mess? She witnessed a crime. That doesn't make it her fault. Try telling that to a 19-year-old girl who's pregnant, alone, and scared out of her mind. Logic doesn't enter into it when you're running on pure survival instinct. James ran his hands through his hair, trying to process the magnitude of what he was learning. 28 years of believing Catherine had simply chosen to leave him, and all this time she'd been protecting him the only way she knew how. What about the baby? What about Olivia? Catherine carried her for 6 months while running from shadows. By the time Olivia was born, Catherine was exhausted, paranoid, and convinced that every stranger on the street was connected to what she'd witnessed. She brought the baby to me when Olivia was 6 months old. She gave up her daughter. She placed her daughter somewhere safe. Anne's voice carried fierce protectiveness. Catherine never stopped being Olivia's mother, never stopped loving her, never stopped providing for her. But she couldn't risk bringing danger to an innocent child. The emerald ring suddenly made perfect sense. Catherine had given it to her daughter, the only tangible connection to the father Olivia would never know, the only proof of a love that had been interrupted but never destroyed. How often did Catherine see her? In person, maybe a dozen times in 27 years. Always from a distance, always careful. But she wrote letters, hundreds of them, sent money every month, religiously, followed every milestone, every achievement, every heartbreak. Olivia doesn't know any of this. Olivia thinks her mother abandoned her when she was 3, because that's the story Catherine asked me to tell. It was easier than explaining why Mommy had to live in a different city, why she couldn't come to school plays or birthday parties or graduations. James felt something breaking apart inside his chest. His daughter had grown up believing she'd been unwanted, unloved, abandoned by the 2 people who should have protected her. And all the while, Catherine had been sacrificing everything, including her relationship with her own child, to keep them all safe. The men who killed that dealer, long gone, arrested on other charges, died, moved on. The threat disappeared years ago. But by then, the damage was done. Olivia was grown, living her own life. And Catherine. Anne trailed off. Catherine what? Catherine was dying. The words hit James like a physical blow. What? Cancer, diagnosed 3 years ago. She spent her last months writing letters. To you. To Olivia. Trying to explain everything. But she could never bring herself to send them. She's dead. It wasn't a question. The pieces of the puzzle had rearranged themselves into a picture that made terrible sense. 2 years, 8 months, and 16 days ago. Hit by a drunk driver in Tucson while she was crossing the street after her shift at another all-night diner. Anne's voice was steady, but James could see tears gathering in her eyes. She'd been planning to come home. Finally, the doctors had given her 6 months, and she wanted to spend them with Olivia, trying to explain everything, But she never got the chance. She never got the chance. They sat in silence, the weight of 28 years of tragedy settling around them like dust. James thought about Catherine, alone and afraid, sacrificing everything for a love she could never claim. He thought about Olivia, growing up angry and abandoned, never knowing that her mother was watching from afar with a heart full of longing. "The letters," he said finally. "Do you still have them?" Anne nodded. "Everyone. Catherine asked me to keep them. Said someday they might matter. They matter now. What are you going to tell Olivia?" It was the question James had been dreading. How do you explain to someone that their entire understanding of their life has been built on a necessary lie? How do you tell your daughter that you exist? That you've been looking for her for decades? That her mother died protecting a secret that no longer needed to be kept? "I don't know," he admitted, "but I can't let her keep believing she wasn't loved. She has to know the truth about Catherine. And about you." James looked at the photos of Olivia scattered around Anne's living room. A lifetime of moments he'd missed. A daughter he'd never known. "Yeah, about me too. It's going to destroy her world. Her world is already built on a lie. Maybe it's time she had the truth, even if it hurts." Anne studied his face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Catherine always said you were a good man. I guess we're about to find out if she was right." Anne disappeared into a back bedroom and returned carrying a weathered shoebox that looked like it had been handled countless times. She set it on the coffee table between them, with the reverence usually reserved for sacred objects. 24 years of Catherine's life, she said quietly, lifting the lid. Every letter, every money order, every photograph she could take from a distance. James stared at the contents. Hundreds of envelopes in Catherine's familiar handwriting, rubber-banded into neat stacks organized by year. His hands trembled as he reached for the oldest bundle, dated 1998, when Olivia would have been barely a year old. "May I?" Anne nodded. She always hoped someday you'd read them. The first letter was written on cheap motel stationery from a place called the Desert Rose Inn in Bakersfield, California. Catherine's handwriting was shaky, rushed, but unmistakably hers. "My dearest James, by the time you read this, if you ever read this, our baby girl will be walking. Anne sent me a photo last week. She has your stubborn chin and my eyes. She's beautiful, James. So beautiful it makes my chest ache just looking at her picture. I wanted to name her Catherine Marie, after us both, but Anne thought it was better to give her a fresh start. Olivia Bennett. It suits her, don't you think?" James had to stop reading as his vision blurred. He looked up to find Anne watching him with sympathetic eyes. "She wrote to you almost every week for the first 5 years, Anne explained. Then monthly, even when she was at her lowest points. And there were many. She never stopped writing. What was her life like?" "Really?" Anne settled back in her chair, her expression thoughtful. "Hard. Harder than anyone should have to endure. She worked whatever job she could get. Waitressing, cleaning offices, stocking shelves at 24-hour stores. Always night shifts. Always places where she could disappear quickly if she needed to." James picked up another letter, this one from 2003. The stationery was from a truck stop in Amarillo, and Catherine's handwriting looked more tired, worn down by years of running. "I saw a man today who looked like you from behind. Same broad shoulders. Same way of standing with his feet slightly apart like he was ready for anything. For just a moment, my heart stopped. I thought maybe you'd found us somehow. But then he turned around and he was a stranger. And I remembered that you don't even know to look for us." She never stayed anywhere longer than 6 months, Anne continued. Usually closer to 3. She'd find a furnished room or a cheap apartment, work until she'd saved enough to move on, then disappear in the middle of the night. Why keep moving if the threat was gone? Because she didn't know the threat was gone. How could she? She was living off the grid. No permanent address, using cash for everything. She couldn't exactly hire a private investigator to check up on the status of a murder investigation from years earlier. James found a letter from 2007, written on notebook paper in what looked like a public library. "Olivia graduated high school last week. Anne sent me the pictures. Cap and gown. That beautiful smile that reminds me so much of you when you're truly happy. She's going to community college, studying automotive technology. Can you imagine our daughter, the mechanic? You'd be so proud, James. She's strong and independent, and doesn't take crap from anyone. I suppose that's partly my fault, growing up without a mother around to soften the edges. She was proud of Olivia, James observed. Incredibly proud, and heartbroken that she couldn't be there for any of it. Do you know what it's like to watch your child grow up through other people's photographs? To celebrate their achievements from 1,000 miles away? Anne pulled out a manila envelope and dumped its contents on the table. Dozens of photographs spilled out. Olivia at various ages, always unaware she was being photographed. Olivia at 6, building a snowman in Anne's backyard. Olivia at 12, working on a car engine with grease-stained hands. Olivia at 16, standing beside a motorcycle. She'd obviously rebuilt herself. Catherine followed her everywhere she could, Anne explained. Not close enough to be seen, but close enough to capture moments. She'd drive hundreds of miles just to take a picture from across a parking lot. James picked up a photo from what looked like Olivia's high school graduation. It was taken from a great distance with a telephoto lens, but he could make out Olivia's face clearly. Young, determined, alone in the crowd of families celebrating their children. Where was she working then? Phoenix, ironically, a diner about 15 miles from where Olivia was living. Catherine used to joke that they were breathing the same air, looking at the same sunset, but they might as well have been on different planets. Another letter, this one from 2015, written on the back of what appeared to be a work schedule. I drove past the garage where Olivia works today. She was in the parking lot, laughing with some of the other mechanics. Her laugh sounds just like yours, deep and genuine. I sat in my car for 20 minutes, just listening to that sound. It's been so long since I heard real joy from anyone. I'd almost forgotten what it sounded like. The money orders. James noticed a stack of carbon copies. She sent money every month. Every single month for 24 years. Sometimes it was only $50 when times were really tight, but she never missed a payment. She wanted to make sure Olivia never went without, even if she couldn't be there to provide it herself. James did quick math in his head. Even at minimum amounts, Catherine had sent tens of thousands of dollars over the years. Money she'd earned working menial jobs, living in poverty herself, so her daughter could have opportunities. What did you tell Olivia about the money? That her mother had left a trust fund before she disappeared. Another lie to add to the pile. Anne's voice was heavy with guilt. But what was I supposed to say? That her mother was out there somewhere, sacrificing everything for a daughter she could never claim. A letter from 2018 caught James's attention. The handwriting noticeably shakier. The doctors say I have maybe a year, possibly 2 if the treatments work. I'm not afraid of dying. James, I've been dead inside for so long already, but I'm terrified of leaving Olivia without ever explaining. She thinks I abandoned her. She thinks you abandoned her too. What kind of legacy is that? What kind of final gift am I leaving our daughter? A life built on the belief that she wasn't worth loving. She was planning to tell Olivia everything, James realized. Yes, she'd made peace with the idea that the men from that night were either dead or had moved on to other concerns. She was going to come home, explain everything, try to rebuild some kind of relationship with Olivia in whatever time she had left. But she died first, 3 months before she planned to make contact. 3 goddamn months! Anne's composure finally cracked, tears spilling down her cheeks. She died believing Olivia hated her. Died thinking you'd given up looking for her decades ago. James felt something fundamental shifting inside his chest, like tectonic plates rearranging themselves after an earthquake. For 28 years, he'd carried the pain of abandonment, the belief that Catherine had chosen to leave him. Now he understood that she'd been carrying an even heavier burden, the pain of forced separation, the agony of loving people she could never be with. There's more, Anne said, wiping her eyes. Letters she wrote but never sent. To you, to Olivia. She spent her last months trying to find the right words to explain 24 years of necessary lies. She handed him another envelope, this one sealed and addressed in Catherine's careful script. For James Whitaker. If he ever comes looking for the truth. James held the envelope with shaking hands. Afraid to open it, inside would be Catherine's final words to him. Her explanation, and perhaps her goodbye. Once he read it, their story would truly be over. No more hoping for reunion. No more wondering what might have been. She loved you until the end, Anne said softly. Even when she convinced herself you'd moved on, married someone else. forgotten all about the girl you met in El Paso. She never stopped loving you. I never married anyone else. I know. She would have been glad to hear that, I think. James looked at the photographs scattered across the coffee table. A lifetime of stolen moments. A mother's love expressed through telephoto lenses and distance. Catherine had spent 24 years in exile, watching her daughter grow up from afar, sending money and prayers and unconditional love through intermediaries, and Olivia had no idea any of it existed. James opened Catherine's final letter with hands that wouldn't stop trembling. The paper was expensive, the kind she would have saved for special occasions, and her handwriting was careful, deliberate. The script of someone who knew these might be among the last words she'd ever write to the man she'd loved. My dearest James, if you're reading this, then Anne has broken her promise to keep my secrets, which means something extraordinary has happened. Perhaps you found Olivia, or she's found you. I pray it's the former, that you've discovered our daughter, and not that tragedy has brought you together. I need you to know that leaving you was the hardest thing I've ever done, but staying would have been the most selfish. I was 19 and terrified and convinced that loving you would get you killed. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe I was a coward, but I chose to save your life over sharing it, and I've lived with that choice every day for 24 years. James had to stop reading as his vision blurred. He could almost hear Catherine's voice in the words, that soft Texas drawl that used to whisper his name in the dark. She wrote that letter 6 months before she died, Anne said quietly. Revised it dozens of times. I found earlier drafts in her apartment after the accident. Tell me about those last years. What was her life really like? Anne pulled out another bundle of photographs, these more recent and somehow more heartbreaking. Catherine at a distance, older now, tired in ways that went bone deep. In one, she was walking out of what looked like a medical building, her shoulders bent with exhaustion. The cancer diagnosis hit her hard, but not because she was afraid to die. She was afraid she'd never get to explain, never get to make things right. She'd been planning her return for months when the drunk driver ran that red light. Where was she living? Tucson. She'd been there almost 3 years, longer than she'd stayed anywhere since she left El Paso. She finally felt safe enough to put down shallow roots, had a tiny apartment near the university, worked the night shift at a diner called Rosita's. James found another photo, this one showing Catherine serving coffee to a table of college students, even from a distance, even worn down by years of running and fear. She was still beautiful in the way that had taken his breath away when they first met. She looked happy here, he observed, as happy as she ever allowed herself to be. The owner of the diner, Rosa, took a shine to her, became the closest thing Catherine had to a friend in all those years. Anne paused, gathering courage for what came next. Rosa's the one who called me when Catherine died, said she'd been carrying my number in her wallet as her emergency contact. What happened exactly? March 15th, 2022, Olivia's birthday. Anne's voice was steady, but James could hear the pain underneath. Catherine had worked a double shift, her own and covering for someone who called in sick. She was exhausted, probably not as alert as she should have been. She left the diner at 6 in the morning and was walking to her car when the drunk driver jumped the curb. March 15th. The date hit James like a physical blow. She died on Olivia's birthday. 25 years old. Our girl was 25 years old, and Catherine never got to wish her happy birthday in person. Anne wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. The irony wasn't lost on any of us. Catherine spent her last conscious moments thinking about the daughter she'd never been able to claim. James continued reading Catherine's letter, each word cutting deeper than the last. I know Olivia believes I abandoned her. Anne tells me she's grown into a strong, independent woman who doesn't trust easily and doesn't let people close. I recognize myself in that description, and it breaks my heart. I wanted to give her a different life, one where she felt safe and loved and secure. Instead, I gave her a life where she believes her own mother didn't want her. I dream sometimes about the life we might have had. You, me, and Olivia. I picture Sunday dinners and family vacations, teaching her to drive, watching you teach her to be brave. In those dreams, we're ordinary people with ordinary problems, and love is enough to solve everything. But we weren't ordinary people, and love wasn't enough. Sometimes love means sacrifice. Sometimes it means making choices that ensure the people you love most will hate you forever. She kept track of every milestone, Anne said, pulling out a manila folder. Olivia's first job, her truck driving certification, every birthday, every achievement. Catherine knew more about Olivia's life than most mothers who live with their children. The folder contained newspaper clippings, printouts from social media, even a copy of Olivia's commercial driver's license application. Catherine had been watching, documenting, celebrating from afar for more than 2 decades. How did she get all this information? Private investigators mostly, nothing intrusive, just enough to keep track. She wanted to know Olivia was safe, successful, happy, or as happy as someone could be who believed they'd been abandoned by everyone who should have loved them. James found a letter from Catherine's final year. Written on hospital stationery, the oncologist says I have 6 months if I'm lucky, maybe 4 if I'm not. I've decided to tell Olivia everything, not about the murder. That secret can die with me, but about why I left, about you, about the love story that created her. She deserves to know she was wanted, planned for, celebrated before she was even born. I'm scared, James. Scared she'll refuse to see me. Scared she'll hate me even more once she knows the truth. But I'm more scared of dying with her believing she wasn't worth fighting for. She never got the chance, James said, the words heavy with finality. 3 months short. 3 goddamn months. Anne's voice cracked. I got the call from Rosa on a Tuesday morning. Catherine had been carrying letters. 1 for you, 1 for Olivia. 1 for me. Rosa found them in her apartment and mailed them according to the instructions Catherine had left. What did your letter say? That she was finally ready to come home. That she'd bought a bus ticket for the following week and planned to show up on my doorstep with 24 roses and a lifetime of apologies. Anne's tears fell freely now. She was going to surprise Olivia at the garage where she worked, just walk in and say, "Hi, baby girl. I'm your mama, and I've missed you every day of your life." James imagined that moment. Catherine, weakened by cancer but determined to reclaim her daughter, walking into Olivia's world after 24 years of exile. The courage it would have taken, the desperate hope, the bone-deep fear of rejection. Rosa said Catherine talked about you constantly near the end. Anne continued, wondered if you'd ever married? Had other children? She was convinced you'd moved on, built a life with someone else. But she still wore your ring on a chain around her neck. My ring. The engagement ring you gave her, she never took it off. Just moved it from her finger to a necklace when her hands started swelling from the treatments. James felt something break apart in his chest. While he'd spent decades searching for Catherine, believing she'd chosen to leave him, she'd been wearing his ring and carrying his love like a talisman against the loneliness. She died believing I'd given up on her, and you lived believing she'd given up on you. 2 people who loved each other desperately, separated by circumstances and miscommunication, and 24 years of necessary lies. The bitter irony was crushing. If Catherine had lived just 3 more months, she would have come home. They would have been reunited. Olivia would have learned the truth about her mother's sacrifice, about her father's existence, about the love story that had created her. Instead, Catherine had died alone in a Tucson hospital, and James had spent another 2 years believing he'd been abandoned by the only woman he'd ever truly loved. There's one more thing, Anne said, reaching for a small velvet box. Rosa sent this with Catherine's other belongings. Inside the box was a simple gold chain, and hanging from it was the engagement ring James had placed on Catherine's finger 28 years ago. The diamond was small, all he could afford on a soldier's pay, but it caught the lamplight like captured starfire. She asked Rosa to make sure this got to you, if you ever came looking, said it belonged to the only man she'd ever loved, and it should go back to him. James took the ring with shaking hands, feeling the weight of 28 years of separation, sacrifice, and undying love. Catherine had kept his ring, kept his memory, kept their love alive, even when she'd convinced herself he'd moved on without her. Now she was gone, and their daughter was sleeping 50 yards away, completely unaware that her father existed and her mother had died a hero, rather than lived as an abandoner. James didn't sleep that night. He lay on the thin motel mattress, staring at the water-stained ceiling while Catherine's letters and photographs spread across the small table seemed to pulse with their own heartbeat. The engagement ring sat on the nightstand, catching fragments of light from the parking lot outside, a tangible reminder of the love that had survived 28 years of separation. By 5 a.m., he'd made his decision. He couldn't let Olivia continue believing she'd been abandoned. She deserved to know the truth about Catherine's sacrifice, about the love that had shaped every decision her mother made, and she deserved to know that she had a father who'd been searching for her family his entire adult life. The knock on Olivia's door came at 7, just as the desert sun was painting the horizon in shades of gold and amber. James heard movement inside, the shuffle of feet, a muttered curse that made him almost smile despite everything. "What?" Olivia's voice was thick with sleep when she cracked the door. Chain still attached. "We need to talk." "Jesus, Colonel, what time is it?" She squinted at him through the gap, taking in his rumpled clothes and haggard appearance. "You look like hell." "I feel worse, Olivia. Please. This is important." Something in his tone must have penetrated her morning fog because she closed the door, unlatched the chain, and opened it wider. She was wearing an oversized t-shirt and boxer shorts, her hair a tangle around her shoulders, but James could see Catherine in every line of her face. "This better be good," she said, stepping aside to let him in. The motel room was identical to his own. 2 double beds, a scarred dresser, industrial carpet that had seen better decades. Olivia's clothes were folded neatly on one bed, her few possessions arranged with military precision on the nightstand. She'd inherited his sense of order along with Catherine's eyes. "You want coffee? There's a pot in the bathroom, but it tastes like motor oil." "I'm good." James remained standing, his hands clasped behind his back in a posture that had become second nature over 30 years of military service. "Olivia, I need to tell you some things about your mother. About Catherine." The change in Olivia was immediate. Her expression hardened, walls slamming into place with practiced efficiency. "I told you last night I don't discuss her. You need to hear this." "No, I don't." She moved toward the door, clearly intending to end the conversation. "Whatever sob story you've cooked up about maternal love conquering all, save it. I lived the reality." She left. She didn't leave. She ran. The words stopped Olivia mid-stride. She turned slowly, her green eyes narrowing with suspicion, and something that might have been hope if she'd allowed herself to feel it. "What's that supposed to mean?" James pulled out the chair from the small table and sat down, trying to make himself less imposing. This conversation would determine whether he gained a daughter or lost her forever, and every word mattered. "It means your mother witnessed a murder when you were 6 months old. It means she spent the next 24 years running from people who would have killed both of you if they'd found you. It means every day of her life was shaped by protecting you from dangers you never knew existed." Olivia stared at him for a long moment, then laughed, a harsh sound devoid of humor. "That's your story. My mother was some kind of witness protection refugee. Come on, Colonel, you can do better than that. She was 19 years old and working night shifts at a truck stop outside El Paso to save money for your arrival. March 22nd, 1997, 3 in the morning. She went to check on some noise in the back parking lot and saw one man shoot another over a drug deal gone bad." The specificity of details seemed to give Olivia pause. She crossed her arms over her chest, defensive but listening. One of the shooters saw her running back into the building. By morning, she was convinced they'd identified her, that staying in El Paso would get both of you killed, so she took you and ran. Bullshit. She used false names, moved constantly, worked minimum wage jobs to stay under the radar every month for 24 years. She sent money to Ann Bennett to help raise you. Every week, she wrote letters to you that she never sent because she couldn't risk the contact. "You're making this up." James pulled out the shoebox Ann had given him, setting it on the small table between them. "These are Catherine's letters, hundreds of them. Pictures she took of you from a distance. Money order receipts showing every payment she made for your care." Olivia approached the box like it might explode, her movements careful and controlled. She picked up one of the photographs, herself at 16, working on a motorcycle in Ann's driveway, and studied it with growing confusion. "Where did you get these?" "Your Aunt Ann. I went to see her last night." "You what?" Olivia's voice rose sharply. "You had no right. I had every right." James stood, his patience finally cracking. "Because Catherine Doyle wasn't just your mother, Olivia. She was the woman I was going to marry before she disappeared 28 years ago. The photograph fluttered from Olivia's fingers. Landing face down on the carpet, she stared at James with an expression of dawning horror. The pieces of an impossible puzzle starting to align in her mind. No. I gave her that emerald ring the night before I deployed to the border. We were planning to get married when I came back. I was 24 years old and completely in love, and I had no idea she was carrying my child when I left. Stop. You were born 9 months after I deployed, Olivia. 9 months exactly. James's voice was gentle but relentless. Catherine never abandoned you. She sacrificed everything to protect you, and she never told me about you because she was afraid I'd try to find her and get us all killed in the process. Stop. The word exploded from Olivia like a gunshot. Just fucking stop. She was backing away from him, shaking her head violently, her face pale with shock. This is sick. This is some kind of sick game you're playing, and I want you out of here right now. Look at the letters, Olivia. Read them. Your mother loved you more than her own life. My mother left me with Anne when I was 3 years old and never looked back. That's the truth. That's what happened. That's what Anne told you because Catherine asked her to. Because it was easier than explaining why Mommy couldn't come to your birthday parties or school plays or graduation. Olivia grabbed a handful of letters from the box, scanning the dates, the addresses, the careful handwriting that documented 24 years of distance and longing. James watched her face as the reality settled in. The mother she'd spent her life hating had been watching over her from afar, loving her desperately, but unable to claim her. She's dead, isn't she? Olivia's voice was barely a whisper. 3 years ago, cancer, and then a car accident before she could come home to explain everything. The letters scattered as Olivia sank onto the bed, her legs no longer able to support her. James wanted to comfort her, to reach out and touch his daughter's shoulder, but he could see she was barely holding herself together. You're telling me that my entire life is a lie. I'm telling you that your mother loved you enough to give up everything so you could be safe. I'm telling you that you have a father who's been looking for you since before you were born. A father. She said the word like it was foreign, incomprehensible. You're claiming to be my father. I am your father. Olivia looked up at him then. And James saw Catherine in her eyes. Not just the color, but the pain of someone whose world had been turned upside down by circumstances beyond their control. Prove it. James pulled out his wallet and extracted a photo he'd carried for 28 years, himself and Catherine at a county fair, arms around each other, laughing at some joke he couldn't remember. They looked impossibly young, impossibly happy, impossibly unaware that their love story was about to become a tragedy of separation and sacrifice. Olivia took the photo with trembling hands, studying her parents' faces, the father she'd never known existed, and the mother she'd spent her life believing had abandoned her. She looks happy, she whispered. We both were. We were planning to spend our lives together, raise children together, grow old together. Then I got deployed, and when I came back, she was gone. Why didn't you look for her? I did. I spent 28 years looking for her, hired private investigators, searched every database, followed every lead, but she was using false names. Staying off the grid, I never found a trace. Olivia was crying now, tears streaming down her face as she clutched the photograph. She never forgot about me. She never forgot about either of us, according to Anne. She was planning to come home, to explain everything and try to rebuild some kind of relationship with you. But she died 3 months before she worked up the courage. I hated her. The words came out broken, anguished. My whole life I hated her for leaving me. She knew that. It was the price she paid for keeping you safe. Olivia looked around the shabby motel room as if seeing it for the first time, her entire understanding of reality crumbling and rebuilding itself in the space of a single conversation. What happens now? She asked. Now we figure out how to be a family, even though it's 28 years too late. The cemetery sat on a small hill overlooking Millerville, its weathered headstones and modest monuments scattered across brown grass that struggled to survive in the desert heat. James drove in silence while Olivia sat rigidly in the passenger seat, her hands clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles had gone white. They'd spent the morning at Anne's house, where Olivia had gone through Catherine's letters with the methodical precision of someone performing surgery on their own heart. Each envelope revealed another layer of love and sacrifice, another year of watching from a distance. Another chapter in the story of a mother who'd given up everything to protect her child. Now they were going to visit Catherine's grave. A simple marker that Anne had chosen when the body was transported back from Tucson 3 years earlier. James had offered to pay for something more elaborate, but Anne had insisted Catherine would have preferred simplicity. "She's really here," Olivia said as they pulled through the cemetery gates. It wasn't a question. She'd seen the death certificate, read the obituary that Anne had clipped from the local paper, but she seemed to need to say the words aloud. "Yeah, she's here." The grave was in the newer section, where the headstones were uniform granite rectangles set flush with the ground for easier maintenance. Catherine Marie Santos. The headstone read, using her real name for the first time in 24 years. Below the dates of her birth and death, Anne had chosen a simple inscription: beloved daughter, mother, and friend. Olivia stood at the foot of the grave, staring down at her mother's name carved in stone. James remained a respectful distance away, giving her space to process the reality of Catherine's death, alongside the revelations about her life. "I used to imagine what I'd say to her if I ever saw her again," Olivia said quietly. "All the angry words I'd saved up over the years. All the questions about why I wasn't worth staying for." A desert wind rustled through the sparse trees that dotted the cemetery, carrying with it the scent of sage and the distant sound of highway traffic. James thought about all the words he'd planned to say to Catherine, too. Declarations of love that had gone unspoken. Forgiveness for what he'd thought was betrayal. Questions about their daughter that would never be answered. "What would you say now?" he asked. Olivia was quiet for a long moment, her eyes fixed on the headstone. "I'd say I'm sorry for hating her. I'd say I understand why she did what she did, even if I wish she'd found another way." She paused, wiping tears from her cheeks. "And I'd ask her why she never told me about you. She was protecting me too. If I'd known about you, I would have moved heaven and earth to find you both. And according to the men who killed that dealer, that would have gotten us all killed." "The men who killed that dealer," Olivia repeated. "Do we know what happened to them?" Anne said they were arrested on other charges years ago. The immediate threat was gone long before Catherine died, but she had no way of knowing that. Olivia knelt beside the grave, her fingers tracing the letters of Catherine's name. "All those years, I thought she just didn't love me enough to stay. But she loved me too much to stay, didn't she? More than her own life. And you never stopped looking for us. Never. Even when everyone told me to move on, get married, start a new family, I couldn't. Catherine was the love of my life, and you..." He paused, struggling with emotions that threatened to overwhelm him. "You were the family I never knew I had." Olivia rose from her knees and turned to face him fully for the first time since learning the truth. In the bright desert sunlight, the resemblance was unmistakable. The shape of her jaw, the set of her shoulders, the way she stood with her feet slightly apart, as if ready for whatever came next. "I don't know how to do this," she said. "I don't know how to have a father. I've been on my own for so long. I don't know how to be a father either, especially not to a grown woman who's already made her own life." James took a tentative step closer. "But maybe we can figure it out together. Tell me about her, not the running and hiding part. Tell me about who she was before all that happened." James smiled, the first genuine smile he'd felt in days. "She was fierce, independent, like you. She worked as a waitress at this little diner called Mel's Place, and she took crap from absolutely nobody. Customers, managers, didn't matter. If they crossed the line, Catherine would set them straight. Sounds familiar. She was also kind, used to slip free meals to truck drivers who were obviously broke, homeless people who wandered in looking for warmth. The owner was always getting on her case about it, but she didn't care." Olivia sat down on a concrete bench near the grave, and James joined her, grateful to be sharing space, if not yet comfort. "What did you two do together when you were, before everything went wrong? Everything and nothing. We'd drive out to the state park and walk the trails for hours, talking about our plans." She wanted to open her own restaurant someday, something small and welcoming where families could afford to eat. "I was going to make the army my career, maybe become a lifer." "Did you? Make it a career?" "Yeah, but it felt hollow without her to share it with. Every promotion, every assignment, every achievement. I kept thinking about how I'd tell Catherine about it when I found her." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching clouds drift across the vast Texas sky. A roadrunner darted between the headstones, pausing to study them curiously before continuing its hunt for lizards. "She wrote me letters," Olivia said eventually. "Hundreds of them. Anne showed me the box this morning. 24 years of letters I never got to read. What did they say? That she loved me, that she missed me, that she was proud of every milestone even though she couldn't be there for them." Olivia's voice cracked slightly. "She knew about my first job, my driver's license, every birthday. She was watching from a distance, celebrating alone. She loved you enough to let you hate her." "Yeah." Olivia pulled the emerald ring from her finger, studying it in the sunlight. "This was yours originally, wasn't it? I gave it to her the night before I deployed. Promised I'd come back and we'd get married properly, with a big wedding and all the trimmings. She kept it all these years. She kept both of us all these years, even when she couldn't be with us." Olivia slipped the ring back on her finger, but James noticed she turned it so the stone faced inward. A private reminder rather than a public display. "I have so many questions about you," she said. "About our family. About where I come from. I don't even know your middle name." "Robert. James Robert Whitaker. Olivia Catherine Bennett. Though I guess it should be Whitaker, shouldn't it?" The suggestion hit James with unexpected force. His daughter, taking his name after 27 years of believing she was unwanted. "Unclaimed. Only if you want to. I want to know everything. Your childhood, your parents, your military service. All of it. I want to know who my father is." James felt tears threatening for the first time since learning of Catherine's death. "I want to know everything about you too. What you were like as a kid, your first heartbreak, your dreams for the future, 27 years of catching up. It's going to take a while. We've got time now." Olivia stood and walked back to Catherine's grave, kneeling to place her hand flat against the headstone. "I'm sorry, Mom," she whispered. "I'm sorry I didn't understand. I'm sorry I hated you for loving me. And I'm sorry you died before we could talk about all this." James joined her at the grave, kneeling beside his daughter in front of the marker that represented everything they'd lost and, perhaps, everything they might still find together. "She can hear you," he said quietly. "You think so? I have to believe she can. I have to believe she knows we found each other, that her sacrifice wasn't for nothing." The wind picked up, rustling through the desert grass and carrying with it the sound of highway traffic, the endless movement of people searching for home, for connection, for the missing pieces of their lives. James and Olivia remained kneeling at Catherine's grave as the sun climbed higher in the Texas sky. Two people learning to be a family in the shadow of the woman who'd made it possible through 24 years of love expressed as absence. Anne was waiting for them when they returned from the cemetery, sitting on her front porch with a manila envelope in her lap, and an expression that suggested she'd been wrestling with a difficult decision. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across her yard, and James could see the weight of 28 years of secret-keeping etched in the lines around her eyes. "How did it go?" she asked as they approached the porch steps. "Hard," Olivia answered honestly, "but necessary." James studied Anne's face, recognizing the look of someone who had one more revelation to share. "There's something else, isn't there?" Anne nodded, holding up the envelope. "Catherine's final letter, the one she wrote for both of you to read together, if this day ever came." Olivia sank onto the porch step, suddenly looking exhausted by the emotional weight of the past 24 hours. "I don't know if I can handle any more revelations today. This one's different," Anne said gently. "This isn't about secrets or explanations. This is about love, about the future Catherine hoped you'd have together." James sat beside his daughter, close enough to offer support, but careful not to crowd her. "When did she write it?" 2 weeks before she died, Rosa said Catherine had been carrying it around in her purse, along with bus tickets to come home. Anne's voice carried the familiar ache of loss. She was finally ready to take the biggest risk of her life, trusting that love would be stronger than fear. The envelope was addressed in Catherine's careful handwriting. "For James and Olivia, when they find each other." She knew we would, James realized. Somehow she knew. Catherine always believed in the power of love to overcome impossible odds, even when she'd convinced herself you'd both moved on without her. She held on to hope that someday you'd find each other. Olivia took the envelope with trembling hands. "Should we read it here or together?" James said firmly. Whatever she wanted to say to us, we should hear it together. Anne stood, smoothing down her skirt with the practiced gesture of someone buying time. I'll make coffee. This conversation deserves something stronger than my usual tea. As Anne disappeared into the house, Olivia carefully opened the envelope. Inside were 3 sheets of hospital stationery covered in Catherine's handwriting, slightly shakier than in her earlier letters, but still unmistakably hers. My dearest James and Olivia, if you're reading this together, then something miraculous has happened. You found each other despite 28 years of separation and all my efforts to keep you apart. I don't know if I should be happy or terrified. Happy that you've discovered each other, or terrified that it means I'm no longer here to see it happen. Olivia's voice caught as she read aloud, and James gently took the letter from her hands. Continuing where she'd left off, James, I need you to know that not a day passed when I didn't think about you. I kept your ring on a chain around my neck, close to my heart, where it belonged. I convinced myself that you'd moved on, married someone else, had the family I couldn't give you. But in my heart, I never stopped being yours, Olivia, my beautiful daughter. I know you've spent your life believing I didn't love you enough to stay. The truth is, I loved you too much to stay. Every day I was away from you was agony, but it was agony with purpose, to keep you safe, to give you the chance at a normal life that I could never provide. James had to pause, his vision blurring with tears. Beside him, Olivia was crying openly, 27 years of anger and abandonment dissolving into understanding and grief. I want to tell you about the day you were born, Olivia. I was alone in a charity hospital in Las Cruces, terrified and exhausted after 18 hours of labor, when they placed you in my arms. You stopped crying and looked directly at me with eyes exactly like your father's. In that moment, I knew I would do anything to protect you, even if it meant you'd grow up thinking I didn't care, James. She has your stubbornness and your sense of justice. Anne tells me she's become a truck driver, independent and strong, taking care of herself in a world that hasn't always been kind. She's everything I hoped she would be, everything you would have taught her to be if you'd been there. She saw us, Olivia whispered. Even separated, she could see who we really were. James nodded, unable to speak, and continued reading. I know you both have questions about the choices I made, about the years we lost. I wish I could explain it all in person. Wish I could see your faces when you learn the truth about our family. But if you're reading this, it means my time ran out before my courage caught up. James, I need you to know that the night before you deployed, when we made love for the last time, I knew I was saying goodbye to the only man I'd ever truly love. I felt our daughter quicken inside me, and I thought about telling you. I came so close to whispering the secret into your ear as you slept, but I was young and scared and convinced that ignorance would keep you safe. I was wrong about so many things. Wrong to use false names, wrong to disappear without explanation, wrong to let you both live with the pain of abandonment. But I was right about one thing. You would have risked everything to find us. And in 1997, with those men still alive and dangerous, that risk would have gotten us all killed. The letter's tone shifted, becoming more urgent, more desperate. I'm running out of time to write this, and there's so much I need to say, Olivia. Your first word was, "Dada," and you said it while looking at your father's photograph. You've been searching for him your whole life without knowing it, James. She has your laugh and your way of fixing things with her hands rather than words. You would be so proud of the woman she's become. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I know the choices I made hurt you both in ways that can't be undone. I'm asking for something more difficult. I'm asking you to build the family I prevented you from having. Love each other the way I loved you both from a distance. Take care of each other the way I couldn't take care of either of you. James set the letter down for a moment. Overwhelmed by Catherine's words and the weight of responsibility she was placing on them, Olivia leaned against his shoulder, the first physical contact they'd shared, and he felt something fundamental shift in his chest. The emerald ring that Olivia wears is more than just jewelry. It's a promise that was interrupted but never broken. James, you promised to love me forever, and you kept that promise even when you thought I'd betrayed it, Olivia. I promised to love you forever, and I kept that promise even when I couldn't be there to show it. Now I need you to promise to love each other, not as strangers learning to be family, but as the father and daughter you've always been, separated by circumstances but never by choice. Take the love I couldn't give you directly and give it to each other. I wish I could be there to see you both laugh together, to watch James teach you things I couldn't, to see Olivia show you the strength I helped create by staying away. Instead, I'll have to trust that love is stronger than loss. That connection is more powerful than separation. The final paragraph was written in a shakier hand, as if Catherine had been running out of strength as well as time. James, thank you for loving me completely, even when I couldn't love you back the way you deserved, Olivia. Thank you for becoming everything I dreamed you could be, even without me there to guide you. You are both my greatest loves and my greatest achievements. Take care of each other. Build the life together that I made impossible. And know that every mile of highway, every truck stop, every sunset I watched alone was worth it because it led to this moment, when my two loves finally found each other. All my love, always and forever, Catherine. The silence that followed was profound, broken only by the distant sound of Anne moving around in her kitchen and the eternal whisper of desert wind through the sagebrush. She orchestrated this, Olivia said finally. Even dying, even scared, she found a way to bring us together. She saved us for each other. Olivia turned to look at James fully, and for the first time since learning he was her father, her expression held no wariness, no defensive walls, only the beginning of acceptance and perhaps even love. What do we do now? James thought about Catherine's final request, about 28 years of searching and sacrifice and love expressed as distance. We keep her promise. We become the family she always wanted us to be. 6 months later, James stood in the early morning light beside Olivia's 18-wheeler, watching his daughter perform her pre-trip inspection with the methodical precision he recognized from his own military training. The truck had been transformed from a simple freight hauler into something resembling a mobile home. Sleeping quarters expanded, a small kitchen installed, storage compartments reorganized to accommodate 2 people instead of 1. "Brake lights," Olivia called out, testing the electrical systems. "Check," James responded from the back of the trailer, playing his part in the routine they'd developed over months of traveling together. The transformation hadn't happened overnight. After Catherine's final letter, they'd spent 3 weeks in Millerville, learning to navigate the careful dance of 2 independent people becoming family. There had been awkward moments, painful conversations, and more than a few arguments as they worked through 27 years of absence and misunderstanding. But there had also been revelations that brought them closer. James discovered that Olivia had inherited his love of mechanical precision and his inability to back down from a challenge. Olivia learned that her father possessed the same restless spirit that had driven her to life on the road, the same need to keep moving until the pain found a place to settle. "Remember when you first suggested this crazy idea?" Olivia asked, climbing down from the cab after checking the mirrors and gauges. "You told me I was out of my mind," James replied, grinning. "Said you worked alone and liked it that way. I also said trucking wasn't a retirement hobby for bored ex-military types. And yet here we are. Here they were indeed." After Olivia's truck had been repaired, instead of parting ways, they'd made an unprecedented decision. James would travel with her, learning the trucking trade while she learned about the father she'd never known. It was unconventional, impractical, and absolutely perfect for 2 people who'd spent their lives defying conventional wisdom. Their first month together had been a disaster of cramped quarters, personality conflicts, and the inevitable clash between military discipline and trucker independence. James wanted to plan routes with military precision. Olivia preferred to drive by instinct and mood. He rose at dawn for morning Pete. She worked best during the long night hours when highways belonged to commercial drivers. But gradually, they'd found their rhythm. James handled logistics and paperwork with the efficiency that had made him a successful officer. Olivia taught him to read the road the way she read people, watching for signs of weather, traffic, and the 1,000 small details that could make the difference between profit and loss, safety and disaster. More importantly, they'd learned to talk to each other. Long hours in the cab had broken down barriers that might have taken years to erode in normal circumstances. James told her about his childhood in rural Montana, about the loneliness of military life, about the years he'd spent searching for Catherine in every city he'd been stationed. Olivia shared memories of growing up with Anne, her struggles to make it in a male-dominated industry, her dreams of someday having her own small fleet of trucks. Phoenix to Portland today, Olivia announced, checking their load manifest. Electronics and computer components, high-value cargo, so we'll stick to main highways. Any particular route preference? I-40 to I-84. Takes us through some country Mom used to write about in her letters. They'd been following Catherine's trail for 3 months now, visiting places she'd lived, worked, and loved during her years of exile. It had been Olivia's idea initially, a way to understand the woman who'd sacrificed everything for their safety, but it had become something more, a pilgrimage of sorts, a way of honoring the mother and lover who'd shaped their lives from a distance. In Bakersfield, they'd found the Desert Rose Inn where Catherine had written her first letters to James. The elderly clerk remembered her. Quiet girl, always paid in cash, never caused trouble. In Amarillo, they'd eaten at the truck stop where she'd worked for 6 months, serving coffee to drivers who had no idea they were being served by a woman living under an assumed name. Each stop had added layers to their understanding of Catherine's life, but more importantly, each mile had brought father and daughter closer together. James learned that Olivia had Catherine's fierce loyalty and her tendency to take in strays. They were currently traveling with a 3-legged cat named Diesel that she'd rescued from a truck stop in Oklahoma. Olivia discovered that her father possessed an unexpected sense of humor and a talent for finding the best hole-in-the-wall diners in any given town. "You ready for this?" Olivia asked as they climbed into the cab. "Define this," James replied, settling into the passenger seat that he'd claimed as his own. "Portland, end of this particular run. We'll have 3 days off, and I was thinking, dangerous territory." "You thinking?" Olivia punched his shoulder with the casual affection that had developed between them. "I was thinking we could drive down to the coast. Mom wrote about wanting to see the Pacific Ocean, but I don't think she ever made it that far west." James nodded, understanding immediately. They would go to the ocean for Catherine, completing a journey she'd never been able to take, fulfilling a dream she'd never been able to achieve. As they pulled out of the truck stop and merged onto I-10, James reflected on the strange turns his life had taken. 6 months ago, he'd been a newly retired colonel with empty years stretching ahead of him. Now he was a trucker's apprentice, learning to navigate the complex world of commercial transportation while rebuilding a relationship with the daughter he'd never known existed. "Tell me again about the night you met Mom," Olivia said as they settled into highway rhythm. It had become a ritual of sorts. These requests for stories about Catherine. James suspected that Olivia was trying to build a complete picture of the woman who'd loved them both from afar, collecting memories like puzzle pieces that might eventually form a coherent image. Mel's diner, outside Fort Hood. She was working the night shift, and I was a young soldier with more attitude than sense. I ordered coffee and pie, and when she brought it over, I made some smart-ass comment about the pie looking store-bought. What did she do? She picked up the pie, walked it back to the kitchen, and returned with a slice that was obviously homemade. Still warm from the oven, set it down in front of me and said, "This one's on the house, but the attitude adjustment is going to cost you extra." Olivia laughed, the sound filling the cab with warmth. "That sounds like her. Anne always said Mom didn't take crap from anyone." I was hooked from that moment. Spent the next 3 months finding excuses to eat at Mel's, just to see her again. Finally worked up the courage to ask her out. And she said yes, on the condition that I learned some manners first. "Did you learn manners?" "Your mother was an excellent teacher." They drove in comfortable silence for a while, the truck eating up miles of desert highway, while the sun climbed higher in the clear Arizona sky. James had learned to appreciate these quiet moments, the steady hum of the diesel engine, the rhythm of wheels on asphalt, the sense of purpose that came from carrying cargo from one place to another. "Dad," the word still sounded new in Olivia's mouth, but she used it more frequently now, as if testing the shape of it. "Yeah, thank you for finding me, for staying, for learning to be family, even when neither of us knew how." James felt his throat tighten with emotion. "Thank you for letting me, for giving us a chance. Mom would be proud of us, don't you think?" James looked out at the endless highway stretching ahead, thinking about Catherine and her dreams of family, her letters filled with love and longing, her final words asking them to take care of each other. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I think she would be." The emerald ring caught the morning light as Olivia shifted gears, preparing for a long climb through the desert mountains. It no longer symbolized abandonment or loss. It had become what it was always meant to be, a promise of love that transcends time and distance, a connection that survives separation, a reminder that family isn't always about who stayed, but about who loved enough to make the ultimate sacrifice. As their truck crested the mountain pass and began the descent toward whatever lay ahead, James Whitaker and his daughter Olivia drove into their future together, carrying Catherine's love with them on every mile of highway that remained to be traveled.